Congress tomorrow night. The plan is expected to increase military spending and make drastic cuts to several federal agencies. All of this as a leading Republican joins the call for an independent investigation into those alleged ties of Trump's team to Russia. We are now in day 38 of the Trump presidency. Let's bring in CNN's senior Washington correspondent Joe Johns. He's live at the White House with more. What's the latest, Joe?
Good morning, Allison. Call it an early peek at the budget blueprint the White House is putting together, and another promise, apparently, to avoid cutting some of the key entitlements, but certain other government departments are much less likely to escape the budget axe. President Trump expected to call for a substantial increase in military spending and massive cuts to several federal agencies in the first draft of his administration's budget proposal. The plan targeting agencies including the Environmental Protection Agency, while aiming to protect Social Security and Medicare. Last night, ahead of a meeting with the National Governors Association this morning,
I think you're going to see something very, very special.
Trump repeating criticisms and vowing to scrap Obamacare, despite a lack of Republican unity around any plan.
It doesn't work, but we're going to have it fixed, and we're going to repeal and replace.
Ahead of his first address to a joint session of Congress Tuesday night, Trump trying to project an image of success.
It's been a lot of fun. But we've accomplished almost everything we've started out to accomplish.
This amid growing calls for an independent investigation into alleged communications between Trump campaign aides and Russians known to U.S. intelligence. Leaders on both sides of the aisle suggesting a Justice Department led by Attorney General Jeff Sessions can't be impartial.
You cannot have somebody, a friend of mine, Jeff Sessions, who was on the campaign and who is an appointee. You're going to need to use the special prosecutor's statute.
The Attorney General must recuse himself.
The American people need to understand whether the Russians, in cahoots with the Trump folks and others, rigged the election.
President Trump attempting to quash the headlines, tweeting Russia talk is fake news put out by the Dems and played up in the media in order to mask the big election defeat and the illegal leaks. The White House taking unprecedented measures to clamp down on leaks. Press Secretary Sean Spicer checking the work and personal phones of aides last week to make sure they weren't using encrypted texting apps or corresponding privately with reporters, specifically asking his staff not to leak information about the meeting or the crackdown effort. Today, the president will meet up once again with members of the National Governors Association, and this afternoon with top Republican members of Congress in advance of his big speech on Capitol Hill tomorrow. Chris?
Joe, appreciate it. Another headline, President Trump's nominee for Secretary of the Navy withdrawing his name from consideration. The man's name is Philip Bilden. He's citing complications with his business interests. This isn't the first time we've heard about this. One of the nominees concluding that they couldn't satisfy ethics rules without, in this case, disrupting his family's private financial interests. Last week, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer said Bilden was 100% committed to being the Navy secretary as reports began to surface that he may withdraw.
All right, well, the president is expected to reveal his budget proposal today. What does it mean for you? Our panel takes that on.
Address tomorrow at 8 on CNN.
All right, we have a little bit of a preview of President Trump's budget proposal. He is expected to call for a big boost in military spending, as well as some major cuts to several federal agencies. We are expecting to get a more specific preview of the president's plan in just the next few hours. So let's bring in CNN political analyst and senior congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner, David Drucker, national political reporter for Bloomberg Politics, Jen Jacobs, and CNN political analyst and Washington Post reporter, Abby Phillip. Great to see all of you on this Monday. David Drucker, help us with the math here. So the president...
Which we don't know yet, so this is going to be good.
We know a little bit. We know a little bit, but get out your calculator, because the president is expected to call for a big increase in military spending. He's said that he wants tax cuts for the wealthy, and no change to Social Security or Medicare. So how does that math work?
Yeah, I feel like I should make an Oscars joke here. Look, the president campaigned on increasing military spending to rebuild a military that actually really does need a lot of rebuilding. And so I think the question is here, when he adds in military spending, a big tax reform proposal that eventually will probably be scored dynamically as generating a lot of economic growth, can that all balance to satisfy conservative Republicans who say that they want everything paid for? And at the end of the day, these things usually don't balance in the immediate. Usually you don't come up with numbers that make them balance, but I think that Trump can get them to spend the money anyway. So I think that's the real question here. Not so much, is it going to balance? I mean, that's an important policy question, but the political question is, will Republicans on the Hill go along with the president when he wants to spend money? And by the way, if you do not reform Medicare and Social Security, the biggest drivers of federal spending we have, they go up automatically every year by law without touching a thing. You can't square that circle over a 10-year period, but they're going to do it anyway, I think, because I think their voters want them to follow Trump, and I think that they're not going to be able to resist that.
Well, but Jen, let's talk about this from the business perspective. I mean, this is the strong suit of the Tea Party, right? I mean, they are deficit hawks, they are debt reduction people, and this will be their first face-off with the president. And we've got to give him the benefit of his own numbers. We'll see what they do. But a tax cut, as we know, is addition by subtraction to the bottom line. So how do we see this first face-off between the Tea Party and Trump?
Well, keep in mind the numbers that are foremost in Trump's mind right now, probably, and that's his job approval numbers, which are in the low to mid 40s. So you know he's going to be wanting to work on this. This budget outline that we understand is coming out today is just his Trump's first bid. It's his first sketch, his first outline. It lets people know, it telegraphs what he's interested in, where he wants to cut. But, you know, he's trying to get it all out there and send an alert to people that this is what he's interested in, get those poll numbers out. It doesn't mean Congress has to adopt it, and they might not, but he wants to get those plans out there, work on, explaining to people that he's going to follow through on those campaign promises, which we're going to hear a lot about on Tuesday night as well.
So, Abby, who in Congress might fight this today?
Well, there will be a lot of, I think, at least questions raised by some of the deficit hawks in Congress, particularly because there is no way, as David alluded, to do all of the things that Trump wants to do without doing some really big things. And I think probably the biggest one of all is going to be tax reform. I think most of these other priorities really can't get off the ground unless Congress is able to agree on tax reform, unless Congress and the White House are able to agree on tax reform. And there are, at the moment, some big disagreements on this idea of a border tax and whether or not Trump supports that idea. But these are big pillars of the Republican agenda that have to kind of be in place in order to find the money to raise military spending, to do infrastructure spending. Partly because making cuts to the EPA, for example, or cuts to foreign aid is not going to come up with sufficient funds to counterbalance any increases in spending. So there will be some deficit hawks, at least raising the question. I don't think they want to go into a real blow-by-blow fight with the White House on this, but politics is policy here, and it will be, I think, a bad headline for Republicans if they suddenly start seeing on the front pages of major newspapers that they are going on a spending spree and not paying for it.
Well, one of those deficit hawks is making his mark on a very different issue. Darrell Issa, we tried to get him on the show today, didn't happen. He says you need a special prosecutor to look at these Russia questions with the White House. I mean, those are bold words from Darrell Issa. What's your take? I guess this is what? Is this some kind of nod to him being in California and barely winning that district because it's so Democrat, or is this something more in of conscience?
Well, no, I mean, I think a lot of this is local politics for Mr. Issa. I mean, his race was the closest in the country. It was the last race called in the country from the 2016 elections. There have been a lot of changes in his district. In California, a lot of voters don't like the president. And so I think he's watching his back ahead of a midterm cycle when, with a Republican in the White House anyway, he's anticipating a tough fight to keep his job. But I do think it means, regardless of all of that, that this issue of Russia and the investigations into the president's connections to Russia is not going away. And so then what we want to look for over time is, are there Republicans who aren't in districts or states as difficult as Mr. Issa that also begin to say the same things that he is saying.
Look, Jen, you've heard from many in Congress say, we have committees for this sort of thing. We have, the Intelligence Committee that in the House and the Senate that can look into this. We're fully equipped to be able to look into this ourselves. Today, people are wondering about that because the heads, the chairman of both the Senate and the House Intel Committee seem to be somehow compromised because they, at the behest of the White House, were talking to reporters already saying that basically they don't think there's any there about the Russia ties. Well, they haven't done the investigation yet. And of course, the question persists whether or not Attorney General Jeff Sessions has been compromised in that way because he was part of the Trump team before Mr. Trump got to the White House. So how can those people be tasked with doing an independent investigation?
Exactly. And, it was interesting on CNN on Sunday, Chris Christie, who's a Trump ally and a former Justice Department official, said, look, we can trust the Justice Department to do this. But then Chris Christie turned around and schooled the Trump administration a little bit and said, I have complete confidence in Reince Priebus, the chief of staff, and his integrity. But listen, these guys, need to, understand what they're doing here. You shouldn't be communicating with the FBI. So Chris Christie even opened the door a little bit, saying we still have some questions, and these guys need to be doing things appropriately and keeping a wall.
It's hard. It's going to be hard for these leaders in Congress to keep their integrity up when it's now open knowledge that the White House came to them, said tamp down these stories, and they went along with it. Anyway.
Panel, thank you very much.
So, the father of a U.S. Navy SEAL